Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is author Emily Churkin, a screen time consultant and the founder of the Student Data Privacy Project. Emily is the author of the Screen Time Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech-intentional family. Emily also works to educate people on how to live a tech-intentional lifestyle through presentations to parents, schools, and professional development training. Emily, thank you for joining me today on A Hopeful Conversation.
I'm so glad to be here. I like hopeful things.
Right? So, can you explain to our listeners what tech intentional means?
Yes. So this is a word that I came up with because I found myself saying, I'm not anti-tech, I'm tech intentional. And what I mean by that is that using tech or being tech intentional around screen time means using it in a way that aligns with our values. And it supports ourselves, our families, our children, our students, and delaying, resisting, limiting access to technology that interferes with optimal development. That's a mouthful. So the way my TLDR for that is later is better, less is more, relationships first.
Okay, that sounds really good. And your background is teaching, correct?
Yes, I spent 12 years teaching middle school. I love middle school students. Not everyone feels that way about middle schoolers, but it's a special group of kids and young people. And I just found it. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So that was 7th grade English for most of my career. And then I sort of pivoted and did a media literacy program part-time when I started having my own kids. And actually what I really witnessed in the classroom was this change from, no kid had a phone when I started teaching. By the time I left the classroom, it was 95% of my students had phones. And so it was a huge cultural shift. And I would start to talk to the kids about it. Like, well, you need to think about how you show up online, what kind of person you're going to be, and how do you talk about people or to people? And they were like, yeah, but it's our parents are texting and driving. It's our parents who are playing Candy Crush or scrolling through Facebook. And I was like, this is an adult problem that is affecting children. And so that made me sort of realize I had to pivot to helping adults. And so I do speak with children and students as well. But I really think this is an adult problem that we have to tackle.
I agree. And I feel like our children so often, particularly teens, they kind of take the brunt of it and the guilt of it and just the responsibility versus adults modeling and making better choices all around for everyone. I like that you used the word values.
Yes.
I found it interesting. I always want to know these stats, but is this still current that 31% of 8-year-olds have a smartphone?
Yes. And that I think is already a year or two old. So it's probably a little bit higher. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Parents, it's a lot. It is a lot. And parents give young people, their children, a phone for probably a different reason than what it ends up being used for. I know as a parent myself, I gave Robbie a cell phone at the end of 6th grade. So Robbie would, if he was alive, he'd be 21 years old. Mm-hmm. And he would, our kind of his age group, most parents gave their child a cell phone at the end of 6th grade before they went into middle school. Where does that fall now? If 8-year-olds, that's...
I know. So that's a great question. It is definitely still a pretty popular transition year where parents are giving phones as kids enter middle school. But I would say it is becoming much more common to do it sooner. And I hear a lot of reasons. There's a couple of common reasons why parents pick up to give the phone. The number one reason is safety. I hear a lot about, it's to keep them safe. And we can talk a little bit about that because I think sometimes our parental fears are driven by our own consumption of clickbait news headlines that are really terrifying. And so we think that the phone is a tool that will provide us the security to know that our kids are safe, when in fact giving the phone can actually drive other health and safety issues. So again, I'm always very empathetic and non-judgmental about parents because I feel like, again, this isn't our fault that things are the way they are, but it's our responsibility and we need to understand the issue and get informed about it and look at and kind of weigh the benefits and the risks in a more intentional way. So yeah, I definitely see a lot more kids getting smartphones. The other sort of slippery fish here is the smart watch. I'll hear parents say, "Oh, well, my kid's not going to have a phone till middle school or high school, but they have an Apple Watch." And in some ways, I don't think that's better. And in many ways, it presents a different challenge, which is the constant distraction, right? Because it's literally on your person. And so, again, this goes back to my tech intentional approach of less is more and later is better. So the later we can provide access to those, including smartwatches, I think the better for children.
Less and later. Yes. How does a parent, how do we unpack that then? Because as a parent, want to, we're on the run all of the time, and our children are going in a lot of different directions, and we want them to keep them safe.
Yeah. There's a paradox here because, first of all, I am not opposed to the old school flip phone or a device, a minimalist phone. And I'm not talking about the child friendly lookalikes, right? There are products on the market that I don't endorse because they end up having a lot more bells and whistles and other distractions than actually I think are needed. If what you really want is a communication tool, an old school flip phone does that and is not internet connected, right? So I think parents can remember that that's an option. The other thing is, there's a huge amount of pressure, both from a parent peer group and the kid peer group. Everyone else has it, or my kid's the only one who doesn't and is left out. And that's a problem. But I also want to invite parents to think that when we give our kids access to devices, we are increasing their experience of FOMO. They're going to see more what they're left out of or excluded from. And so it becomes having to make this difficult choice as a parent. I'm sure people have been hearing about Jonathan Haidt's new book, The Anxious Generation, which is excellent. I use his research in my book. And one of the things he talks about is the need for collective action, that it's going to take a lot of parents changing how they approach this before the rest of the sort of parents are going to follow along. And so I talk about that being, sort of what I call the first fish, because when you look at a school of fish in an ocean, how does it change direction? And it takes one fish to start the process, but actually second and third fishes have to also follow before the whole school shifts. So, being that first fish parent is important, but you also need the second and third fish to follow. And so you can be those parents. And I do think, I'm optimist that the pendulum is swinging and that I'm hopeful that this trend is going to reverse or at least shift direction. And I will kindly and gently point out that adults have a lot of issues with our own phones ourselves. And so sometimes there's a lot of guilt and shame around our own use and feeling like we're a hypocrite to set limits for our kids and not for ourselves. Or our kids might point that out. and yeah, it's true, but it's still important to have those conversations.
Okay. Yeah. It's so helpful just to start the conversation. And there's so many ways this conversation could go because it's deep. But we have a limited amount of time.
Yes.
So less later. What about, can you explain to us the Student Data Privacy Project? Because
yeah, this is it's funny. This is a problem that's been around as long as social media and all of these other challenges that we're hearing about really in the mainstream media now. But it's kind of like the unsexy one. People hear data and privacy and they go, oh, Google knows everything I'm doing, And one distinction I will point out right away is that we're adults. So technically we've consented. We know when we sign up for our apps, we click terms and conditions, though none of us actually read it, right? I mean, we just click it. But when it comes to children, what we're finding is there's a lot of data mining. There is a lot of violation of student privacy, in particular in K-12 schools. And higher ed's a different challenge, but it's parallel. And, a lot of my activism is around protecting student data and privacy in schools. And this is one of those things where this is like at least a two-prong problem. We talk about kids' personal devices and bringing them to school. And that's a huge issue. And I love the phone-free schools movement that's happening. But the secondary part of this is the ed tech piece. The fact that kids are using computers for school. They're being asked to log into platforms. They're reading PDFs and ebooks instead of physical textbooks. As a former teacher, that to me is not in alignment with development and learning and what children actually need to thrive and succeed. And parents are often not given a choice. This is sort of, if you want to participate in school, you have to do this. And that, quite frankly, is completely unacceptable in my mind. But what are your alternatives? A lot of parents feel powerless. And so it's a very multi-tentacled problem, shall we say.
The student data privacy project.
Yes.
How does a parent become aware and stay engaged to like have some control and a voice in their child's education when it comes to the devices that are school issued and the platforms that kids have to use for education?
And I always, as a former teacher, I feel very protective of teachers. I don't want, we can't go lunging for, blaming all of the teachers. Often they don't have a choice in how this is implemented in the classroom. So I always, again, one of my favorite lines is to replace judgment with curiosity, to start by just asking questions about, can you tell me about how we're using these platforms? I mean, so many students now are bringing laptops back and forth, to school and home. I suppose I could get on board a little bit with some of the high school age students doing that. I don't love it, but I definitely don't see a need for elementary students to be doing that. And they are. We have kindergartners home with iPads,
Yeah.
And in fact, a friend sent me a photo the other day of, it was before the bell rang, and she took a photo, and all the kids were allowed to play on the playground before the first bell. And a group of kindergartners were sitting on the ground, each of them on their own school district iPad, right? And we know how important play is, especially to young children, for brain development, social skills. They're about to go sit inside on their iPads. This is the 15 minutes they get to run around and play, and they're choosing the iPad. And, that is not a child's fault, because when we talk about brain development, children's brains are not fully developed until they're well into their 20s or even later. And so
I know
we can't expect them to manage and self-regulate. Look at adults. We're terrible about it. So this is one of the things that makes me angry when we say, well, kids just need to turn it off or parents just need to take it away. It's not that simple. If it were, I wouldn't have written a book about it. Like I wouldn't be here on this podcast, right? So it's
very true.
It is worth the fight, but it is not a fair fight, which is kind of a contradiction, right? We've got this hijacked neural pathways. The dopamine is being, just pumped with access to the design features that make apps and games and social media so compelling and addictive. And it's deeply problematic. We would object so hard if our kids were being given cocaine in school. And yet they are being given a form of cocaine in school or in personal devices. And I know that's an extreme statement, but sometimes it takes a metaphor to kind of illustrate what's going on.
That's a strong one. Oh, yeah. I love the replace judgment with curiosity that could be applied to so many areas of our lives, but we're consumers of this, as all of us. And how do we have a more tech intentional lifestyle? What are some of your bits of wisdom there?
Yeah, well, my favorite piece of advice to give, and this is for parent, teenager, young adult, anyone can do this. It's just a strategy called living your life out loud. And so what I mean by that is anytime you're reaching for your phone or computer or whatever, you just narrate what you're doing as you're doing it. I'm going to look and see what time school gets out and then what time we need to be at soccer practice. And I'm going to text your friend to see if they can pick you up. And, the stream of consciousness, it's annoying. But as I always say to parents, when your kids roll their eyes at you for doing that, it's working. And there's some benefits to this, which is accountability for ourselves, right? Like it's bringing my own awareness to it. That's the intentional part, right? Like, oh, why am I reaching for my phone? I'm bored. I'm standing in line and now oh my gosh, I've opened Instagram and I'm just scrolling through Instagram and I don't feel better, and then we can attach the emotional piece of it. We can say like, this is such a time suck. And I thought I was going to just do a few minutes and it's been 25 minutes, and I wonder why it's so hard for me to put it down. All of that, our kids are listening. And it allows them to see that, I always say it's not a switchblade, it's a Swiss Army knife, right? It's a multi-tool. They get to see that it's not just the back of a square. This is how we are using this as a tool, as a distraction, as a source of entertainment, all of the ways it's being utilized. And we can talk about how it's hard for us, how it makes us feel, the challenges it presents to us, because only then can we get our children on board with that, right? I get parents all the time who ask, well, what do I do to get my kid to get off their device? Well, I don't lead with this, but we start with you. If your phone is in your bedroom at night, why would your teenager not put their phone in their room at night? And so, again, it requires a family shift, right? Back to those values about what's important. And, to be able to justify it, maybe there is a good reason your phone's in your room at night, but, you have to think about kind of that bigger message and the modeling part of that. So living your life out loud is my favorite strategy.
Living your life out loud. I like that. I'm kind of taking the mindless out of it too. Just like, I don't have children at home anymore, but I think if I practice that, I would probably be like, whoa.
Exactly. And there's benefits for adults, again, even non-parents or parents whose children aren't at home, because again, it's so easy. This is the problem and the beauty of technology. It's easy. It's just convenient and easy. But what we know about learning is that it happens in moments of friction, in moments of struggle. So if it's presents, even if we make it a little bit harder, even if it's like I charge it on the other side of my bedroom as opposed to my nightstand, those little changes benefit us because we have to work a little harder to access it. There's other sort of technical changes we can make, like turning our phones to grayscale or adding, you can turn off all your notifications, for example, these are sort of common, you hear about these a lot now. And those are all great and helpful. But it's not a silver, like magic bullet. It's like one of many tools that we need to use. And I think, again, normalizing it culturally, right? So when we go out in the world and we see everybody on their phone and we realize they're not living their life out loud, it feels shocking when you start to pay attention to it. Even 10 years ago, remember we'd go to restaurants and people would be on their phones and we were like, so rude. And now everybody does it, right? It's such a quick shift.
It is a shift. When did it happen? Why did it happen? I mean, it's more than just our devices are the most addictive piece of machine ever. But
yes.
I think I hear the value part. Like as a culture, we have accepted it, that it's okay all of the time versus having face-to-face interaction, dialogue, conversation, engaging in a book and being creative. And just what this is doing to us as a society is pretty alarming. Yeah.
And I think to your, to the third point about my, later is better, less is more, and relationships first, that the technology ironically takes us away from the relationship part. I mean, people might argue, well, I'm communicating with my friends. That's how I stay in touch. But there is nothing that can replace an in real life conversation, or interaction, especially for young people and especially post COVID when many kids were many humans were driven inside to be, and again, like in the spring of 2020, digital technology was the lifeboat we needed to sort of maintain our connection to our work and our home and our, all of our family and friends. But, a lifeboat isn't long-term housing. And, now we are continuing as though we are still in that it justified something we were already doing. I think people blame COVID a lot for why it's so bad. It was bad before. COVID just accelerated the problem, and it was fuel to the fire. So the good news is, and because I always want to stay optimistic and hopeful to your podcast theme, is like, I think it pulled back the curtain for a lot of us. I think there's a lot of awareness that this is an issue and it's not going away. And it's going to take all of us, parents, educators, therapists, politicians, children, young people, to say, I don't want to be a commodity. I don't want to be just a cog in the wheel. I really believe that reclaiming our humanity, I know this is such a big thought, is literally going to save democracy. That's my opinion about this, that it is that important that we re-engage in the real world with other people, because siloing ourselves off into social media arguments doesn't make anything better. And it actually makes a lot of things worse.
Yeah. I feel like we're on the tip of some of that starting to happen as a society. Like there are more parties engaged, and it's not just parents fighting their teenagers about the responsibility of using your device in the right amount of time and not exposing yourself to things you're not supposed to expose yourself to.
Yes, I agree. And I think that's a really important point, to go back to mental health as well. Like, what are some of preventative things? Because, parenting has always been hard, but parenting in the digital age is just this whole new layer of complexity. A teenager is a tricky kid. It's
Mhm.
again, we're talking brain development and hormones and all of that's normal. But when you layer on social media and addictive gaming and all of these other things, it's hard to know what's normal and what's influenced by the tech. And so I get asked a lot, how much is too much time and what parental controls do you recommend? And
Wow.
actually, there's research to back this up too. As a preventative measure, were you going to ask?
No, well, the parental controls you piqued my
Oh,
interest because everybody, like adults, think that they can control a child's phone. It's like, when I have a problem with my phone, I am going to a young person to have them help me with it. Like they are way advanced with anything I can put on their phone.
exactly. And so that's exactly right. First of all, kids are always going to find the workarounds. This is why I tend to steer away from recommending parental controls as the sole solution, right? It might be one tool, but it cannot be the only tool. And actually, the two questions I think are more useful for parents to ask are, do I know what my child is doing online? Like, do I really know? And do I have a good relationship with my child? In the context of when they see bad stuff, they will come and ask me about it or talk to me. Those two things are incredibly important in this day and age as an antidote or as a tool to protect and support mental health. And that's hard. And it takes a lot of work and uncomfortable conversation. So I don't want to say, just do that and you're fine. It's tricky, but it matters, and I think I sometimes joke about drive-by parenting. It's like sometimes we think as parents, we have to sit and have these deep heart to hearts. It's those little quick moments where your kids hopping in the car and you're just catching them for a few minutes after school, or they walk into the kitchen and you can just ask a few questions. The more we can kind of keep those moments of connection going, that is going to help.
Hmm. This is good. This is really good and helpful. I feel there's like an element of from parenting that like parents can be kind of naive and
Yep.
think that this does not apply to my child. Like
Oh,
my child would never
yes.
expose themselves to that. My child would absolutely know to ask me. Um, is my assumption, is there some truth to that or not?
That there's naivete. Yes, that is absolutely true. I think part of it is because as parents, we can't imagine, right? Like, but think about how people present themselves online. It's a persona that's not how they are in real life more often than not. And so that's true for children. And that's, I always say to parents, it's not that your kid is seeking this out most times. I mean, occasionally, sure. It is accidental. It is stumbling into something. It is the messaging you get through a DM that seems innocuous or friendly, or like, just someone wants to chat with me, that quickly spirals into something else. So I say it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. It is not that your child is weak willed. They are being hijacked by manipulative design. They are being tricked by adults who know better. All of those things, if your child is interacting with any sort of internet, social media, gaming, you have to have those conversations. And I don't know many children who don't interact with that. So at this day and age, we have to assume that that's the conversation that just has to be happening. Like the birds and the bees, it's just part of that conversation. And to remember that children are curious naturally, and that isn't abnormal. And so we have to say over and over again to our kids, I know it's normal to be curious. The internet is not designed for children. There are things on there that aren't for kids. When you encounter something you don't understand or that's scary or confusing, I want you to come and tell me. I will never be mad at you. I appreciate it. I will help you. I will never be mad. But we have got to reinforce that message, because that's when kids get into trouble, is when they are ashamed or embarrassed or don't know what to do and they try to handle it themselves. So, parents, we have to kind of take the blinders off. It's there. I mean, and the reality is if our kids online, they are going to encounter something that we don't think they're going to encounter. And so we have to have that conversation.
And not
Multiple.
an easy parenting situation. Like
Not at all.
my youngest, I mean, Robbie should be 21. My daughter's 25. I don't have to be in that arena anymore, but like to not react in a negative way, to keep that communication flowing and your child coming to you incredibly hard.
It is. And I don't want to ever take fear-based approach to this. I think fear paralyzes us.
It does.
And so
Absolutely.
hopeful, I love this again, to your point, this matters, and let me be truly humble for a moment here. I'm literally the screen time consultant, and I fight with my kids about screen time. So I don't want anyone to think I have this mastered either, because my 16-year-old likes video games and he plays them more than I would like him to. But I promise you, we are having a lot of conversations about it. And this is not easy. And what I try to remind myself every night is, did I have a moment with him where I connected that wasn't a fight about a screen? Did I ask him about something other than, did you do your homework? Right? Like making sure that I am checking in with him as a young person in the world today, because that relationship piece is so critical to his future development. I know that sounds like so cliche, but it's true.
No, it doesn't at all. I like, Emily, that you just said, like, parenting out of fear. Like, I feel like sometimes that's what I represent to other parents, because I've taken the time to be vulnerable and share my story. And did I make mistakes parenting? Possibly, but I did my best job that I could. What caused Robbie to die by suicide? I don't know. But like, I want, as a society, like, I think we can do better for our children. I think we can do better for ourselves.
Yes. Well, and what a powerful message. I mean, to have the unthinkable happen in your own life and still be willing to help other parents. I mean, that makes me feel emotionally it's what a powerful, powerful thing to provide other parents, to say that in spite of the worst possible thing, I still have hope and I can still help other people.
Oh, I absolutely do.
Yeah.
I wish that parents could be more vulnerable with one another too, instead of like
not on Instagram.
Oh, that's a fair statement. But face to face, like, this is what I struggle with as a parent, that like, how did you handle it? Like collectively using each other as a resource instead of just trying to walk the path and have perfection always be the goal alone.
Exactly. I joke I'm a recovering perfectionist, but see, the problem is perfectionism gets us nowhere. And, we don't want our children to think that perfection is the end goal, because it is in the messy and the complicated that learning and growth happen. Back to the friction comment, right? And so what we have to hope for as parents is, are we equipping them with the values, the skills, and the support to sort of enter the world as a young adult, and not to bubble wrap them so much they never experience adversity either, right? It is eternally this challenge as a parent, right? Did I go too far? Did I not go far enough, right? Like the zigzag of parenting, right? And you sort of hope it evens out somewhere in the middle. And it isn't always clean and easy. And I think that that's okay. And I think one of the paradoxes in this is, like, we actually want our children to have moments of difficulty in their young years, because that's going to be an antidote, again, to mental health in their adult years, right? Is to know I can persevere through something. And, again, there's so many pieces of complexity to this, but I think parents do sometimes approach this with so much fear that they inadvertently overprotect. And that doesn't actually help the kids grow and learn. So, that's a hard thing. That is a hard thing to do.
It is a hard thing. Oh, goodness. What do you think the ideal age for a young person to get a phone is?
Later is better. I used to joke I'd give my kids a phone at 25, because then when they go down to 15, I'd be I'd be nice. Obviously it's happening younger and younger, but I do think that there is value to delay as long as possible. And again, I'm no fool. I know that even there are parents who say, "Oh, no social media till 16." I respect that. You do you. However, if 85% of 16-year-olds have phones, they're going to see it on their friends' phones, right? That's just the reality. So it doesn't exempt us from the conversations about it. And I think there's a way to scaffold. I think if we go from 0 to 60, if we just assume 16 is this like magic age where kids can handle social media, we're fooling ourselves too, right? It's not like the brain just, ta-da, we can handle all of it. It doesn't work that way. So, I really push the flip phone or the minimalist phone as a first tool. Actually, one strategy my daughter and I have used for the last year is to share my phone. We have been using my phone number, and it's an Apple phone, so she can access it on an iPad, like text her friends or use FaceTime to call. It's been such a great experience. I mean, she might disagree, but in terms of the conversations it's allowed us to have about how you engage with people, how you show up in a group chat. Can we just talk about group chats? Oh my God, they're awful. But it takes her experiencing it to understand why they're awful, right? So there's an opportunity there. And I recognize I taught 7th grade, so I'm very comfortable with my 12 and now almost 13-year-old daughter and having these conversations, but it's been very powerful as a parent. And I will say what makes it easier for me as a parent is that her school has a no phone policy. And I cannot stress this enough. If your school doesn't have that, there is momentum growing for Away for the Day. And that means first bell to last bell, not just during class time, the entire day. And I am a huge fan of that. It absolutely makes my parenting job easier. And so that helps me with my daughter to know, well, you just can't have it at school. So it's a non-issue, right?
Yeah.
And so
guess
that helps.
what? Yeah. And you can still get a hold of her if you had to. I think there's so many parents who are like, oh my gosh, I can't have to have contact with my child at all time.
Oh, yeah.
We
Exactly.
were raised, our parents got in touch with us if they really had to.
And that is an independence opportunity for our kids. They need to go and have time away from us from 8 to 3 every day. That is childhood independence skill building. And I can't tell you how many teachers tell me that parents are texting their kids during class. Or kids are texting their parents saying, I'm anxious, or I got to be on my test. I don't know what to do. Can you call my teacher? That is totally not good.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
That requires a lot of deep breathing for us as parents and saying, I can trust that my child can handle this, right? That's an important piece of this.
I love how you used you do you. I'm fortunate I get to spend a lot of time in high schools, and and most classrooms have like a place where they drop their phones. So I have their attention when they're in class, but I really like to pay attention to when they're walking from class to class and waiting for class to begin, and the little amount of interaction that they have with one another because they're on their phones. And I always just point it out to them, like, hey, take that chance to smile at somebody that you don't know. Say hello.
Exactly. That's the drive-by parenting in this situation. Of course, it's the drive-by social skill building, those 5 minutes of passing period are incredibly important. So to give them the phone, then you just see kids walking down the hall with their heads down. And there's so many, going back to safety, right? Like being in the real world and walking around with your head down does not provide good situational awareness skills, right? Like you need to be able to look up and not walk into traffic. You need to be able to look up and hear if someone's calling your name. Like there are so many little pieces to this that matter. And, I would say away during the pockets during class is a great starting point. It's not enough. And I also recognize the ed tech problem. They might put their phones away and still have laptops in front of them. That's a problem too. Even at my daughter's school, which is Away for the Day, they have Chromebooks. And walking behind the kids in the auditorium the other day, 3 boys are playing video games on their school district computers. So it's not the full solution, but it's part of the solution. And, parents can support that. There is pushback sometimes from parents about phone away for the day. And, that requires, again, us as parents to address some of our own anxiety about the world and to trust that our kids can handle it. But I understand the fear. I do.
I like that. We all have responsibility in the solutions. It's not the administrators. It's not the teachers. Like, let's collectively define our values. This has been a really good conversation.
Well, I really appreciate you having me, and thank you. And thank you for letting me into your world a bit too. And I hope this is hopeful and inspiring and not doomsday-y.
No. Emily, we end every podcast with the same question.
Okay.
You're ready. I can tell. Yeah. What does the world need to hear right now?
You're not alone. You're not alone. That this is hard for all of us and that baby steps matter.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for being a guest today on Hopeful Conversations. To our listeners, we remember to tune into our next episode and hope. Hold on. Pain ends. Thank you, Emily.